Hello and welcome to LPS Live Board Preview. I'm Mindy Burback, LPS Communications Director.
And I'm Don Mayhew, Lincoln Board of Education member. We started this Facebook Live program to share what is happening at Lincoln Public Schools.
And it airs prior to Board of Education meetings. We highlight what's happening at Lincoln Public Schools and we answer viewer questions. If you do have any questions during our live show, please type them into the Facebook chat and we will try to get to them if we have time.
Mindy, it's good to talk to you again. Today we're going to be talking about technology. That's one of those things that's near and dear to my heart. As you know, about 10 years ago, we had a group get together, a community-wide strategic planning committee. And one of the goals that came out of that work has evolved into our connected learning for the achievement of students and staff, or our CLASS program. Joining us tonight, we're going to be talking with our Chief Technology Officer, Kirk. Kirk, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it.
All right, Kirk, there are four main components in the CLASS plan. We've got connected classrooms, device-assisted learning and instruction, systems for learning, and professional learning. Briefly walk us through these four components and how they've been addressed over the last 10 years.
Well, the first two, connected classroom and device-assisted learning instruction, are primarily about the stuff you need. Whether that's in the case of connected classroom, that's a wireless access point in each classroom, along with some kind of a projection device, generally a short throw projector, so that the teacher can share their screen with the learners that are in the room. It's also audio systems, audio enhancement systems, so that the teacher's voice can be heard distributed equally throughout the classroom, creating a sound field that's been shown through research to be very important and in how students learn and whatnot. So that's some of the stuff that goes with connected classroom. Then the device-assisted learning instruction is really about the devices themselves, in our case, largely Chromebooks for students that they need in order to be able to connect with content, connect and collaborate with one another, and those sorts of things. So that forms the infrastructure, and then that marries up with really our systems for learning and information management. We're a very heavy user of the Google Cloud, as well as any number of other third-party platforms that allow us to provide students with content and an environment for them to kind of do that constructivist learning, where they can start to put the pieces and parts together and work collaboratively in that regard. And then the professional learning piece, it's really about assisting teachers and supporting teachers in there as they begin to move from sort of that, the stuff to really leveraging that stuff for learning. It's really about how that transition gets made, and nothing ever stays static in the area of technology. So there is persistent opportunities for those continuous learning for our teachers.
Kirk, when we were working on this, it was quite a process, and you were a big part of that process. It was several years of planning, several more years of implementation. There was a lot of looking at best practices, looking at what other districts were doing well, mistakes that other districts had made. There was a lot of work that went into that, and we were doing that because we knew that the technology was a tool that we could use to enhance the educational experience that our kids were getting in the classroom. It took several years. We purchased Chromebooks for all of our students between grades 3 to 12, and then later we went back and added the second graders. During the pandemic years, we've been able to use this technology, this infrastructure that we've had that was put into place to provide our remote learning courses to students in LPS. And I think that in some ways, perhaps that gave us a leg up over a lot of other districts in the state. They had a lot of challenges when trying to provide that remote instruction. But it also did create some challenges for us. What were some of those challenges that you and your staff had to deal with during the pandemic?
Well, I think, as we said, you get to that point where the plan stops being about the stuff and is very much about leveraging it for learning. And so we were well into sort of that process, but the context for it was still largely how we deliver instruction from a classroom centric perspective. So, with that in mind, when all of a sudden we're in a pandemic, the first thing was, as you mentioned, we're grades 2 through 12, but grades 2 through 5 we're not taking the devices home, and they needed them there. So right away, we needed to figure out a way for parents to come get those, retrieve those in the middle of a pandemic, and be able so that the students would have them and could use them. The next thing was, as we migrated from 2019-20 to 2020-2021, was we moved to synchronous learning, and that that really was a pretty big sea change from what before was largely placing in more of an asynchronous way, putting those documents out there and whatnot. Students could then read, respond to those. There was some office hours, if you will, that they could consult with their teachers, but largely it was really more get like a packet and work on that packet. So when we did that, when we moved to that this fall, that meant to basically Zoom-based coming into the classroom remotely. It changed it in a lot of ways, not the least of which is, what about our K-1 learners? So what we were actually able to do is by having a refresh cycle on our devices, we actually took some devices that Chromebook devices, and that otherwise would have been going out of service, and we just quickly got those out to our K-1 students, so that now, if you're a remote learner, work fully prepared K-1 all the way up through, we were able to do that. So those were sort of some of those infrastructure challenges we had to deal with, to say nothing of the fact, last year, pre-COVID, but last year we averaged on any given week, Zoom was largely used by teachers, and on any given week we might have 10 to 20,000 total minutes of time altogether. This year, in any given day, this year we're doing 3.5 million minutes per day.
Yeah, our usage has gone way up.
Yeah, it's gone crazy. And so with that, you get all the challenges associated with it from a support perspective, 2 to 3 times the number of calls coming into the help desk, because now we've enjoined our parents and students who are calling in because they need help remotely and those sorts of things. So really accelerated the number of calls, because we've accelerated the amount of use and basic utilization. I think the other thing that we've done is really, it's one of those things where, there's a little bit of that trial by fire. But one of the things that comes out of something like this is, if necessity is the mother of invention, or the father, you're not going to suddenly forget what you've learned and become capable of doing during this time. And so I would really look for this to ultimately put us in a position to really accelerate our ability to leverage technology for learning ways that maybe without the pandemic it would have taken longer to come to this point.
Sure. Hey, Kirk, we got a question from Morgan Redding. She's asking, why did we select the document cameras that are used in the classrooms?
Well, one of the things that we look at is we're always cost conscious. We're always looking for the best for a best value. Some of our teachers were actually the first ones that suggested to us, along with the librarians, what we use primarily are IPVO cameras. Very small form factor, very easy to set up and use. They'll hook into either a Chromebook if a substitute teacher was using that, or the laptop that a teacher has. They really provide an opportunity for teachers to do some of the things that they have done traditionally back when I was in school, and even at university. They were using overheads and so on, and acetate, and writing on them. They do some of those same things to provide some of that same functionality, but also they can obviously show objects and whatnot, and they can also use it as an additional camera to use in the classroom, to show things in the classroom, including some of the remote students' fellow learners. So a variety of reasons that we brought those in, but largely it was an answer to and in recognition of any number of those that were already in place. It's just we hadn't systemically put those everywhere prior to the pandemic, but that was one of the purchases that we made with some federal monies that came in from the CARES Act.
I think that a lot of people at the time were thinking, as I recall comments that we had almost a year ago, we've got a bunch of computers, we've got the internet, we've got all this infrastructure. Therefore, remote education should be easy. And you and I have been talking a lot on the technology side. But I think a lot of people weren't aware that, there was a huge impact on teachers and how they were teaching in the classroom, and then also teaching to the kids at home, but also from a curricular point of view and how we deliver the curriculum. And the system that we had, I think, for the needs that we had, the direction that we were headed at the time, was fantastic. But when you're talking about a pandemic and potentially 100% remote education, that's not what that system was designed for. And while we had a leg up on responding to that, I think if we were going to start from scratch and design a system that was made for 100% remote education, it would probably look different than what we've got now. I think we're headed now in that trajectory, but there's a lot of work between now and there. And I think there were several comments about, well, you had all summer to think about it. When we were working on the Chromebooks, that took 3 years just to plan, let alone more years to implement. Talk about that a little bit. Some of these challenges on the curricular side, on the educational side. I mean, there was a lot of retooling that had to happen.
Well, I think one of the things that is so hard for us to imagine, and for people who don't do it, we tend to think from our own experience. And our experience is maybe a device or 2 or 3 in our houses and hooked up to maybe a Wi-Fi network or something like that. When we're talking about Chromebooks being in the hands of over 40,000 students, anything you do 40,000 times, the more complex that something is, the more you have to ramp up to make sure that just at its most basic operational level, it's going to stand up and it's going to work. On top of that, then you're really talking about how are we going to make this something that we can truly leverage for learning. And as you said, our curriculum in many ways, there's a lot of our curriculum that is still text-based, and for good reasons. Somebody asked me years ago when we talked about moving and having a device per student, they said, so that means LPS is going paperless. And I sort of jokingly said, well, actually, we did that on May the 30th, 2011, when our district office burned down. But no, the role here is not to talk about going paperless or what we're not going to do. Talk about what we are going to do, which is really to embrace digital tools. Because when paper is the best way to do something, why wouldn't we do it the best way? So we knew that, we still have a lot of print materials and whatnot. Well, suddenly in a digital environment, when you're talking about 100% remote learning or, 14,000 learners on any given day from LPS that are coming in remotely, that traditional print doesn't translate particularly well. So one of the things then you're looking at is how can we very quickly mobilize to take any amount of this stuff that's in print text and get it into a form factor where it really becomes a series of digital objects that then teachers can string together. And that's a really different. That's very different, and some of our curriculum comes in packaged in that way, but a very high percentage of it does not. And so teachers had to very quickly ramp to that. Now, in addition to that, teachers may have been using Chromebooks with students and using maybe Google Classroom and those sorts of things. But when you're talking about all of a sudden teaching in a hybrid setting where some of my learners are in my classroom, some of my learners are not, and I've really got to be able to in a very agile fashion, move back and forth between them and make sure I'm meeting those learning needs. That's quite a thing to try to accomplish. And the first thing for some of our teachers was, okay, I've never tried this before to do this whole thing with the distance learning element to it. So there were some nervous moments and whatnot getting ramped up. It's a lot of work. It's difficult for them and a challenge. They've risen to the challenge, generally speaking. At the same time, I think there is a great deal of desire to get back to, as we would look at remote learning maybe in the future, particularly if it was this type of synchronous learning, to really get to more of a focus on let teachers that are teaching in person teach in person, let teachers who are teaching remote learners teach remote learners exclusively, just so you don't have that constant code switching back and forth. It really puts a cognitive load on, and I think our teachers get to the end of the day and they're kind of worn out.
Like with anything else, the technology is a tool and it's not a replacement for high quality education. And I remember back many years ago when we first started talking about this, you were one of the people who said that often and early. Kirk, we've got a question from Glenda Beckman. She's asking, will all the grade levels continue to keep the Chromebooks even when this year is over? And are they now an integrated part of K through 12th grade?
Certainly we're going to have some funding considerations that we're going to be looking at. I do think that in some form factor, now that we've used Chromebooks down through K-1 and demonstrated that they can be useful there, we may well keep that in place. Whether we're going to be able to maintain the same level of a device per student through K-1, that'll of course have to be something that's considered both on the level of budget and the fiscal considerations, but also from an instructional standpoint. That's for people like Dr. Larson and Takako Olson, who is our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Sarah, Dr. Salem and others, to look at and kind of say, okay, is this the best way to deliver instruction, or how do we deliver instruction to bring the most out of it? So it's hard to say that we're absolutely going to keep that in the way that it's sitting there now. But as I said, any amount of things that we've learned would tend to instill in me this idea that, I think Chromebooks are going to probably stay or have a place in K-1, and we'll continue to leverage them.
Well, and I think if we're doing this right, we're always going to be assessing. We're always going to be looking at what our needs are and what the appropriate response to those needs are. Kirk, my last question for you. Last month, the board approved purchasing Chromebooks to refresh our supply for 2nd, 6th, and 9th grade students. Thinking forward, what are some of the other things that you and your team are working on as we continue to move forward with our class plan?
Well, it's varied. We've got new schools that we're building. Something that comes with those is really looking at the number of screens that are around those schools, and will be around those schools. Every classroom has a screen in it. How can we leverage those screens to communicate information, that everything from activities, video announcements in the morning, maybe announcements from a district level. Basically, if we need to use something like for safety and security, standard response protocol information could be on them. You name it. So that's a whole another variant or way that we're going to really start to leverage that which is part of the connected classroom environment. So you're always looking to take that to its next step. We'll be refreshing our wireless infrastructure. That's between 4,500 and 5,000 access points that have to go out into classrooms to bring those up to the current standard of Wi-Fi 6. So just those things that you do that are always new and part of a refresh. And I guess the last thing I would say is, and it builds on some of what we're talking about with the technology being a tool and whatnot. The goal is really to continue to work directly with instruction to figure out the very best ways that we can leverage this for learning. What I tell people is that increasingly teachers, as they are taking on these digital tools and really being able to utilize them well, we see this in other industries as well. And one of the most profound is in the medical field, where any number of surgeons are using this device called the Da Vinci. And this device allows the surgeon, a skilled surgeon, it doesn't obviate that surgeon, doesn't mean that takes them out of the game. Quite the opposite. What it does in the hands of a skilled surgeon is allow them to make even more precise cuts, which reduces the amount of recovery time. And so any number of people are beginning to look at surgeons and saying, if they're not using the Da Vinci, I don't want to go to them because I don't want to increase my recovery time. You might be a great surgeon, but I want you using those types of tools that can enhance the experience and reduce recovery. I think we're seeing the same thing with teachers in their uptake of technology to say it isn't a replacement, but man, in the hands of somebody skilled, it can make a difference in how we make those help students make those connections in the classroom.
Gets to a point where it stops being cool and it starts being an actual usable tool that's helping us out. I was a little disappointed I didn't hear you say anything about adding the VR headsets. We're going to be talking about those pretty soon, aren't we?
Well, I think augmented reality and virtual reality. I think we're going to see an uptick on both of those. And one of the biggest things that we have to kind of get around is always the form factor. The first Oculus Rift, for example, were so big. It was somewhat physically imposing to think, can I get that on my head and not tip over? Right, and as the size keeps going. So I think we're going to get to where the form factor will be such that, and the cost and whatnot will get to where we'll start to see profound opportunities for those things to be integral to learning, whether that's manipulating 3D objects and so on. I think all of that's going to be there in an augmented reality sense. And then just the virtual, the full-on VR, where you can experience environments that, frankly, we just don't have an opportunity to get our students to otherwise.
I was recently playing with an Oculus Rift, and I'll tell you, I think the educational potential is huge. Given enough time going forward in the future, I know we're going to be talking about this. All right, Kirk, you've mentioned your team and the work that they have done. Let me just take a second to say thank you so much to you and your team for all the hours that you've been putting in to support our staff and our students in technology. Thank you for that. If you want to hang tight just for a minute, I'm going to go back to Mindy just for a second. Mindy, we got a question from Josh Smith. And he's asking if we're going to have LPS students transitioning to attending full-time like other schools.
And to answer Josh's question, we continuously to work with the Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department. We look at the community conditions and we follow their guidance. At this time, we're planning, because we are in the red, and the mayor did just have another press conference today, we are remaining in the red. So we are going to continue with our pandemic plan as it's written, and we will continue to make adjustments and communicate that with families as we make those adjustments.
Morgan, Glenda, and Josh, thank you so much for your questions. To other folks who may be watching this later, if you come up with a question, go ahead and type it down in the comments. We'll try to respond later as we can. For now on this broadcast, that's all the time we have. Thank you again so much to Kirk for joining us today. And be sure to join us for our regular board meeting that's going to be starting soon at 6 p.m. And you can watch it on our website at lps.org or on the LNK TV educational channel.
And our next LPS board update on Facebook will be Friday, January 22nd at noon. Just a reminder, you can submit those questions on our Facebook page or on our website, lps.org. Just click on the blue Contact Us button. And with that, thank you for joining us.